Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello, and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today, I'm excited to talk to Deshawn Charles Winslow about Decent People. Hi, Deshawn.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Great. Thank you for inviting me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so excited. This book is, would you call it Southern Gothic? Not really Southern Gothic, but is it?
You know, I didn't think of it that way until maybe a few months ago when I was on a panel with the LA Book Festival, and it was, the panel was Southern Gothic, or maybe it was American Gothic. But anyway, it wasn't until then that I thought, oh, maybe this does fit in that category. I just sort of thought of it as a Southern, a Southern mystery thriller, that addresses social topics, but
and it does so well. And so to give a little setup, it's set in the mid-70s, is that right?
Yes.
And is there a reason you chose that particular era?
Yeah, I chose it. It was mostly about logistics. So Leroy is in the first book in West Mills, and he's born in 1962. So in order for me to make him 14 in the second book, it landed on in 1976. But I was fine with that year, even if I had chose another character, if I hadn't brought the loving family over into this book, I probably still would have done the 1970s. Yeah.
It's a delicious period. And I lived in the 1970s. I was, maybe teenager in the 1970s. And there are cars and facts about the 1970s that I felt so familiar with. And it was such an enjoyable thing. You certainly knocked it out of the park with cars and particular ideas about those cars.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, I did a lot of Googling and looking at photos.
I met someone recently who has like a 1967 Matchbox car. Do you have a 1973 Matchbox car?
No, I don't.
We're going to have to get you one then.
Yeah. Well, they probably cost so much now. They're collectibles.
That's absolutely right. So let's get into sort of the meat of it. We meet Josephine Wright, Jo, as she's called, as the book starts, and she's found the love of her life and is moving back to West Mills. Give us a little bit of idea of what Jo's like.
Yeah. So Jo, was born and partially raised in West Mills, but she and her family moved away. They moved north when she was a very little girl, and she really didn't know why. But she is essentially a New Yorker, and so while she has done some visiting the South and, in pursuit of retirement and that sort of thing, she is very much a New Yorker. She's not into small town, everyone knowing everyone's business and that sort of thing. And she's not used to people knowing things about her when she hasn't even had a conversation with them. And she is a very independent lady, but she is a person who was born in the early 1900s. And she does have the ideal, she has, traditional ideas about marriage. She doesn't have to have a husband, but one would be nice, and she has had some failed relationships, and Limp offers her a new beginning. She's 60 years old, but at the core, Jo is she's a very independent woman. She is a fighter. She is determined. And she's a meddler also. She's a well-meaning meddler, but that's, she differs. I think the way she differs from most people in the town is that independence that she requires, the independence in thought that she requires.
So having read about the fact that she lived in New York and she's come back to North Carolina, one of the things that I don't think I really picked up on so much was the fact that what you categorized her, she's definitely a New Yorker. I will say that there were scenes that I was actually frightened for Joe, because she certainly goes straight to the source. She doesn't beat around the bush. And I liked that about her, but I was also worried about her character in the book because racism, her brother's gay, so there's some homophobia, and there's a lot of isms going on to where she's come back. And Limp has been accused through gossip. And that is something that I recognized so much from growing up in a small town in the South. Gossip, whether it's true or not, is crippling. Will you talk about that?
Yeah. So I definitely wanted the gossip to be a really big part of this book. It's almost a character, it almost becomes a character without a face. And it is because, as you say, in small towns, gossip is almost like, it can almost be like the primary vehicle of communication. A conversation, a phone call is made, and you sort of start with the gossip. It's, did you hear such and such and such, and then you move on to things that are actually factual. But yeah, I needed the gossip to be a really big part, because it's the way these people communicate, and it becomes almost like a belief system. So and so's having an affair, and it's not even questioned whether it's true or not. It is just, well, so and so said it, so it must be true. And so that's how this community works. And Joe, while she's not a gossiper, it is interesting that she goes from person to person collecting information in a very bold way. But when something doesn't sound quite logical, she lets people know. Yeah.
And that was an interesting thing about reading Joe's character in this, because she is coming back to a place she was born, but she's been gone a long time. And I think when you go back to a small town, and it's not only in the South, it's important to say, same thing happens in Iowa and Idaho. It just happens that your book is set in the South. But when you go back to some place you've been gone a long time, there are certain people who say, well, this person is uppity because, they've gone somewhere else. So it almost puts them behind the 8 ball. And then her love, Limp, has stayed there his entire life, and he has busted his hump to be a good man. And it takes just a whiff of scandal that all of a sudden that changes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's like so many people in the world who have strife with family members, whether it's their immediate family members or distant cousins or whatever. But because his sister and his father, and because they're popular, their family issue is a little bit more elevated, and so, yeah, his reputation is just demolished just because he had an outburst, and just because there was this long-term friction between he and his half siblings. But while Limp is not perfect, he is, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. But the community, once again, with that gossip, they need something that binds them. Like they have religion that binds them, and now coming together to accuse somebody of this murder is just another way that they bond with each other. Yeah, it's like sport. Almost.
I agree with it. Is like sport. I find that gossip can be just as cutthroat as a football game or basketball game. And of course, I think oftentimes humans in general want a quick answer. Because it is important to say there's a triple homicide that sort of opens the book, and that triple homicide in a small town is enormous. A triple homicide, even in Los Angeles, would be big, but when you're talking about a small town, it is all anybody can think about.
Right.
And we want a quick resolution. And unfortunately, because Limp was brought down to the police station, unlike anyone else, he's in a very different situation with that.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, he is, of the people who could possibly have committed this crime, he is the one that has the least amount of money, the least amount of education, and when he gets upset, he kind of explodes, and so he is such an easy target, because I mean, the grocery store owner, why would she commit murder, and
Precisely.
yeah, and the man who owns the shopping center, why in the world would he commit murder?
That's right. Well, and there again, I think a big thing, and this unfortunately mirrors reality in the real world. Those people who are socioeconomically depressed are the
Hmm.
easiest targets because they can't fight back.
Absolutely.
If you have a pocket full of money, or if you're a Caucasian person, it's a lot easier to escape at least the first pass.
Yeah.
And, and not all police are bigots, so I certainly don't want to put it there. But in
Right.
this instance, the police at least have one eye closed and the other one may be a little blind. So,
Hmm. Exactly.
and it is
Exactly.
something that unfortunately we still see in society. This isn't anything new. Um, I kept feeling like, of course, in the 70s, quote unquote, Jim Crow has supposed to have died and moved on. But having grown up in Eastern North Carolina, I know that he's still limping along even in
Yeah.
2023. So it's
Yeah.
there again, it's something that I think in your book, which deals very directly with racism and homophobia, it is not necessarily the main topic, but it is certainly an underlying topic. I was very impressed with your handling of that.
Thank
It
you.
it felt real. It didn't feel
Hmm.
contrived at all. So I compliment you on that. Everyone
Thank you.
should read this book.
Thank you.
And
I
of the
wanted to. I wanted the homophobia piece to definitely be there and have its moment, but I didn't want the book to be exclusively a queer novel. Not this one,
Right. Well, and
Hmm.
I think that was the thing about it. Joe is protective of Limp, her boyfriend, fiance. She's also protective of her brother Herschel, who is
Yeah.
gay, and they navigate what happened years and years earlier. And I
Hmm.
think that, once again, secrets is a big part of this book.
Yeah.
There are lots of secrets I'm not even close to in this because there's a long list of them. But
Yeah.
those secrets are things that inform who we are as people and how we navigate this world. And you do see with Joe, you see somebody who is fierce and loving, and just as I said with both Limp and Herschel and Limp's son Nate, she's
Hmm.
she's tenacious, and it
Yes.
it is a good thing. But as I said, it worried the hell out of me in some
Yeah.
parts.
Yeah. Because sometimes you watch a thriller, or read a more traditional mystery. Someone who gets too close to the source, sometimes they turn up dead too. you
Well,
know.
I'm glad Joe didn't. I hope I'm not
Right.
giving anything away, but I will tell you there were a couple of times I'm like, sister, you better be real careful because you poking the wrong hornet's nest.
Right. Right.
So do you want to give us a little setup about Miriam, and because there's Miriam and Marva and Laz are the three who are murdered at the beginning of the book. Give us a little flavor of what Miriam is like.
Sure. Marion.
Marion.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. No problem. So Marion is the town's only black doctor, and she's the only black doctor for several miles. So she is popular for that. But that entire family, the Harmons, they were notable before she was even an adult, because her father is one of the wealthiest. Not that he's filthy, filthy rich, but for this place and time, he has the most money any black person has ever had, because he has a lot of property, and it's unclear how he came into all that property, and I leave that as it is. But that status that they hold, the Harmon family sort of it makes this particular family stuck up, you know.
Mhm.
And so, you know, she goes off to school, becomes a doctor, and her siblings sort of follow her to the north. And so Marion is she's not very nice. Her siblings, Marva and Lazarus, they are nicer. You know, they are enigmatic, but they are nicer. But I think their father, as readers will learn, their father was not a nice man. He's a provider. He wants the best for his children, but he's not nice. And Marion has sort of inherited that from him, and she carries that coolness, that chilliness. She carries it into her career and into the community, and she makes enemies in subtle ways with most people, you know, but with one character, she does something really overt. Um, but yeah, that's, you know, Marva is a little more outgoing, but she's under her sister's thumb. And Lazarus is not very outgoing, and he's under both of his sister's thumbs, you know. And he is suspected to have secrets of his own, you know, that's hinted at a little bit. But that's the Harmons, and so the three of them are shot to death. You know, we find that out in the beginning of the novel. Yeah.
And I think that's a perfect little tease, because now everyone needs to know what happened to them. So,
Yeah.
are you working on something new?
Yeah, I'm in the very early stages of writing a book that is. I'm trying to decide whether I'm going to set it firmly in the 80s, or if I'm going to set it in like 2017, but a lot of the book flashes back to the 80s, you know. And then the only thing I'll say about it right now, because I'm in that stage where I keep changing my mind about things every 2 days, you know, every 2 days. But I think that the book is largely going to be about two people who have a lot of love for one person, and it's up for the reader to sort of determine which one of them should have that third person. Yeah.
Oh, I
But I
like
will
it.
say, yeah, just so that people don't think it's a romance, it is not, these are not romantic relationships. That's the only hint I'll give for now. Because again, I may change my mind in a month and it may be a
That's
romance.
that's the best thing an author can do, is make up their own minds. I think that's
Yeah.
fantastic. And
Yeah.
there's some, back to Decent People, there's some romances in Decent People, some
Yeah.
romances that I saw coming and some that I did not see coming. And that, of course, made it even more delicious. So that was just wonderful.
Thank you.
Do you have website or social media you'd like to share?
Sure. My website is DeshawnCharlesWinslow.com. No spaces or anything, no punctuation in the middle. And my Instagram is also Deshawn Charles Winslow with no spaces or punctuation. Those are my only two socials at the moment.
That's perfectly okay. I talk to a lot of people who say they're trying to get off of one or the other or all
Yeah.
of them, so it's totally understandable. Again, the book is called Decent People, and it's by Deshawn Charles Winslow. I cannot recommend it enough. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Thank you. Hang on for me just a second.
Okay.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.